In the UK, canned soup has long been seen as a safe, cozy, and budget-friendly meal, the kind of thing you can grab after work without giving it a second thought. But there's one thing almost no one talks about. Many perfectly innocent-looking tins have been hit with allergy alerts, product recalls, or salt levels so high that nutrition experts openly warn against them. And all of this lands directly on the health of you and your family. This video breaks down the 8 canned soup brands in the UK you should avoid at all costs, before revealing 2 rare options that are still relatively safe if you absolutely have to buy something off the shelf. As the cost of living keeps rising, more people lean on canned soup as a cheap and convenient fallback, and that's exactly when cost-cut formulas packed with salt and sugar quietly slip onto supermarket shelves. 8. Morrison's Savers. When I see Morrison's Savers on the shelf, I get why it exists. It is the quiet superhero of a tight budget. The packaging does not try to charm you with rustic farms or artisan heritage. The message is simpler than that. This is cheap, this is warm, this will get you through the week without turning dinner into a maths problem. But ultra-budget soup always comes with a trade-off that the label does not shout about. The biggest risk is not that it is automatically terrible. The risk is how easy it is to assume you are buying a bowl of straightforward veg goodness when you might be buying a formula built to hit a price point first. Morrison's Savers tomato soup lists tomato at about 67%, then water, sugar, modified maize starch, rapeseed oil, and salt, with allergen notes including milk and mustard. Amazon UK +1. That combination is not a crime, but it is a reminder that tomato soup in the cheapest tier can quietly lean on sugar and starch to create comfort and thickness. So the healthy feeling you think you are getting may be more of a budget illusion than a nutritional win. And this is where it gets even more uncomfortable. In real life, shoppers are not just managing salt and sugar, they are also trusting the basics of labeling. On 11th of June 2021, the Food Standards Agency issued an allergy alert for Morrison's minestrone soup because some packs contained celery that was not mentioned on the label. The alert also noted the soup was labeled suitable for vegans, but was not because it contained bacon. Food Standards Agency. For anyone with a celery allergy, that is not a minor paperwork slip. That is a direct health risk. What makes this worse is the psychological hit. People who buy Savers are not hunting for luxury. They are looking for predictable, safe convenience. A mistake like undeclared celery does not just shake confidence in one product. It shakes confidence in the idea that the cheapest option can still be reliably transparent. So my warning here is measured, not dramatic. Savers is not something I would label as universally bad. But it is not something I would treat as a default, especially if someone in the household has allergies or if you are trying to keep a closer eye on salt day to day. And if you think the risks of budget soup stop here, the next brand has a story that makes people nervous about the can itself. 7. ASDA. When I see ASDA, Just Essentials in the soup aisle, I understand the appeal instantly. It is not pretending to be a lifestyle brand. It is not waving a little flag of tradition or promising a farm-to-bowl fairy tale. It is simply saying, in plain retail English, you are tired, you are busy, the bills are loud, and this will feed you without punishing your wallet. In 2025 Britain, that sort of honest simplicity can feel like emotional relief, but the uncomfortable truth with value-tier canned soup is that the comfort is often engineered as much as it is cooked. Just Essentials. Tomato soup starts with tomatoes at roughly 67%, followed by water, sugar, modified starch, oil, and salt. On the front of pack, the salt cans sit around 0.94 gg per half can. None of this is shocking on its own. What is shocking is how easily the vegetable story slips into the mind while the formula quietly leans on sugar and starch to keep the flavor and thickness consistent at the lowest price point. You think you are buying a simple bowl of tomatoes. You may actually be buying a carefully costed shortcut that feels healthier than it really is. The bigger trust issue is not just nutrition, it is whether the most basic promise of a tin is reliable. In early March 2003, ASDA recalled thick country vegetable soup 400 degrees over concerns that some cans were overfilled and could swell and burst. That sort of incident hits differently from a debate about salt. It turns an everyday low-stress purchase into a moment of doubt. If the can itself can become the problem, you cannot help wondering what corners a bargain label might be forced to cut elsewhere. What makes this worse is that families who buy just essentials are not asking for perfection. They are asking for predictability. They are not trying to win a wellness contest. They are trying to make a safe, warm meal stretch to the end of the week. When a budget staple carries even a historical reminder of packaging risk, it chips away at the idea that value and safety can comfortably sit in the same trolley. So my warning is practical, not dramatic. Just essentials is not something I would call universally bad. But I would not treat it as a default, especially if you are watching salt closely or shopping for someone with sensitivities. Read the label, check alerts occasionally, and remember that cheap comfort can still come with hidden compromises. And the next brand in this countdown, it has an even shinier promise of cheap and cheerful that deserves a harder look. 6. Tesco. When I spot Stockwell & Co. in the Tesco aisle, I get the vibe straight away. This is pantry fuel for people who live in the real world. No rustic romance, no craft theater, no health halo trying to hypnotize you. The packaging is almost disarmingly plain, like it is saying, you need something warm, you need something cheap, and you do not have time for the brand Olympics. That simplicity is exactly why this one deserves a closer look. The danger with ultra-budget soup is not that it is automatically awful. The danger is how easy it is to stop reading once you see a familiar category name. Stockwell & Co. tomato soup lists tomato puree at about 55%, followed by the usual cost-friendly lineup that helps the product behave like soup at the lowest possible price: water, sugar, modified starch, oil, and salt. This is a classic formula that prioritizes price and thickness over a pure tomato experience. It is not illegal, and it is not a scandal by itself, but it does quietly shift the value equation. You are not just paying for tomatoes, you are paying for a structure designed to deliver comfort on a budget, even if that comfort leans on sugar and starch more than you would expect in a bowl you made at home. The deeper issue is trust, and Tesco is a habit store. Millions of households buy there not because they love drama, but because they want predictable safety. On 14th April 2022, the Food Standards Agency announced a Tesco recall of chicken and vegetable cup soup with croutons due to the risk of small pieces of metal, and the agency stated the product was unsafe to eat. When the word metal enters the conversation, we are no longer debating flavor or nutrition nuance. We are talking about physical safety, the kind of risk that turns a quick lunch into a genuine worry. What makes this worse is how it messes with the mental promise of supermarket stability. You do not expect a budget line to be fancy, but you do expect the basics to be reliable. A recall like that, even if it is not the same product as Stockwell's canned soup, becomes a reminder that the bar for trust has to stay high across the whole own-label ecosystem. So my warning here is calm but clear. Stockwell & Co. can absolutely help a tight budget, but if you are trying to cut back on hidden sugar and starchy fillers, it should not be your automatic weekly pick. And if you think mid-tier own label will be a clean escape from this kind of trade-off, the next brand may change your mind. 5. Sainsbury's. Sainsbury's own brand soup sits in that sweet spot of British trust. It is not the cheapest option you grab in a panic, and it is not the premium tin you buy to impress yourself on a rainy Sunday. It feels balanced, sensible, the kind of choice you can put in the basket for the whole household without a second thought. That middle ground confidence is exactly why it belongs in this countdown. Because when I look at some of the nutrition listings, the quietly healthy image starts to wobble. Take Sainsbury's cream of tomato, 400 grams. The quick guide can show sugars around 11.5 egg and salt around 0.89 grams per half can. The salt. typically lands in that familiar medium zone, while the sugar number is the part many shoppers simply do not expect from something that visually reads as vegetable comfort. It is not that tomato soup is supposed to be sugar-free, it is that the label and the category shape a story in your head. You think you are picking a straightforward bowl of tomatoes. What you might be getting is a formula that keeps taste and indulgence smooth enough to win repeat buys, even when you are shopping with a health mindset. But that is only the nutritional half of the problem. The bigger knock to trust comes from allergens, because that is where the consequences stop being theoretical. On 25 November 2019, Sainsbury's recalled tomato and basil soup due to wheat, gluten not being declared on the label. The risk is clear for people with celiac disease or a wheat allergy. When an issue like that shows up in a major supermarket chain, it makes the aisle feel less like a place of routine and more like a maze of small print. What makes this worse is the emotional contradiction. People buy own brand from a large retailer because they assume the controls are tighter and the labeling should be more dependable than a random bargain tin. A gluten labeling error undercuts that assumption. It turns a normal weeknight purchase into a question of whether you are trusting the system a bit too easily. So, my warning is measured. This is not a reason to swear off Sainsbury's soup forever. It is a reason to treat even mid-tier own brand with the same discipline you would give a budget line. If your household has allergies, choose clearly labeled options, keep the ingredient list simple where you can, and check food alerts occasionally. And the next brand in this list? The concern will not just be allergens. It will be something even more basic than that. What the ingredients are really doing behind the comforting front label. 4. Cross & Blackwell. Cross & Blackwell is the kind of brand that sells comfort before it sells ingredients. It lives in that nostalgic corner of the soup aisle where hearty and classic are meant to do the heavy lifting. For plenty of shoppers, it feels like a safe middle choice. Not fancy, not suspiciously cheap, just a reliable tin that promises you will be full and satisfied. But this is where the maths of salt can quietly override the romance. A retail listing for a Cross & Blackwell Minestrone 400G can show roughly 0.50 green salt per 100 green, which looks almost reasonable at a glance until you realize that adds up to around 1.99 of salt per full can. That is the trap of old kitchen boldness. The stronger the savory flavor, the easier it is to stop interrogating the label. You are not thinking about daily intake. You are thinking about warmth, nostalgia, and a quick fix that tastes like someone actually cooked it. The real gut punch is what happens when a brand that leans on wholesome language slips on the most sensitive part of trust. In 2018, Cross & Blackwell recalled green vegetable and kale soup because milk was not declared on the label as highlighted through FSA-linked recall information. For anyone with a milk allergy, this is not a small technical error. This is a direct health risk hidden inside a product whose name practically whispers, "This is the sensible one." What makes this worse is the emotional bait and switch. Vegetable and kale is the kind of phrasing that shoppers reach for when they are trying to be good to themselves or when they are shopping for someone they care about. When that label fails at the allergen basics, it does not just disappoint. It feels like a betrayal of the healthy-ish promise baked into the words. So my warning here is deliberate, not theatrical. You do not have to swear off Cross & Blackwell entirely, but this is a brand where the safe move is to check allergen labeling carefully and be honest about how often you are willing to take on a high-salt comfort tin. If your household is watching salt or managing allergies, there are smarter picks in the same price bracket. And this is still the traditional brand layer of the list. The next stop takes us into a more uncomfortable paradox. Premium does not automatically mean protected from the same kinds of failure. 3. Waitrose. Waitrose is supposed to be the place where you buy peace of mind. When you reach for an own label tin there, you are not just paying for soup. You are paying for the feeling that someone, somewhere in the chain, has done the worrying for you. It is the premium shortcut to trust. The kind of brand choice that lets you exhale a little in the middle of a busy week. That is exactly why the numbers can feel so irritating when you look closely. Some Waitrose canned soups can still land higher on salt than shoppers expect, especially if you eat the whole tin rather than treating it as 2 servings. The issue is not that Waitrose is uniquely bad. The issue is the mismatch between the mental story and the quiet reality of convenience food. Premium packaging can make a medium to high salt profile feel less urgent because you assume the brand already solved that problem for you. And this is where the story turns from mildly annoying to genuinely uncomfortable. In January 2017, Waitrose recalled hearty minestrone soup due to the risk of blue plastic pieces, based on recall information linked to the Food Standards Agency. When the risk is a foreign object, it does not matter how nice the label looks or how tasteful the aisle lighting is. The conversation stops being about flavor and starts being about basic physical safety. What makes this worse is the subtle insult it creates. You pay extra to worry less. Yet here you are, still needing to worry like everyone else. That is not just a product issue, it is a trust issue. It makes the premium aisle lose a bit of its magic because the question becomes unavoidable. What exactly am I paying for if the AGI fundamentals can still go wrong? This is why I would not treat Waitrose's own label as an automatic safe default. It can absolutely be a good choice, but it should be a conscious choice with the same label checking habits you would use anywhere else. If you are watching salt, compare tins. If allergies are part of your household reality, scan the ingredient and allergen panels like your routine depends on it, because sometimes it does. And if this one frustrates you, the next brand will push that feeling further. It is another reminder that the word premium can sometimes be more of a comforting costume than a guarantee. 2. Baxter's. Baxter's is the kind of name that arrives with a ready-made image in your head. Scotland, family recipes, proper hearty bowls that feel like they belong in a quiet kitchen rather than a corporate boardroom. It is the brand you pick when you want something a little more reassuring than a budget tin, something that feels worth the extra coins because it carries tradition on its sleeve. That is why the salt story matters so much here, which has previously highlighted Baxter's Vegetarian Mediterranean Tomato as one of the higher salt options, at around 0.630 per 100 grams. When you hold that against the UK salt reduction target for soup of around 0.50 gram per 100 grams, the gap is not dramatic on paper, but it is meaningful in real life, especially if you are the kind of person who finishes the whole tin without thinking twice. This is the premium trap. The branding makes you feel like you are choosing something more careful, so you are less likely to clock that your comfort lunch might be pushing your salt budget harder than you expected. The uncomfortable part is what this suggests about trust. In 2022, Baxter's Food Group was linked to an FSA recall of Frey Bentos Just Chicken Pie due to the risk of small pieces of plastic. It is not a soup product, and it is important to be fair about that. Still, when a parent company in the canned and ambient food world is associated with a foreign object recall, it becomes a reasonable prompt to ask how robust the wider quality culture really is across the portfolio. What makes this worse is the expectation gap. People buy Baxter's because they want 2 things at once: flavor that feels old school and a sense of superior reassurance. When the salt profile can still run high in certain varieties and the group has previously faced a packaging-related safety alert elsewhere, that premium trust gets a scratch. It is not a scandal headline, it is more of a slow erosion of certainty. So my warning is simple and practical. Baxter's is not a brand I would tell you to boycott, but if you love it, treat it like a comfort choice rather than an everyday health default. Look for clearly labeled lower salt options where available and be mindful of portion habits. Because in this part of the countdown, the real lesson is not that tradition is fake, it is that tradition does not automatically protect you from modern label maths. And the final brand? It is the one most people grew up trusting without question, and its history in the UK is about more than just what is in the tin. 1. Heinz. Heinz is not just a soup brand in the UK, it is a childhood soundtrack. It is the tin you recognize before you even read the label, the one that turns up in student cupboards, office lunches, and rainy week dinners when nobody wants to think too hard. People buy Heinz the way they buy comfort itself, not because they ran a spreadsheet, but because memory feels like a guarantee. That is why this one lands at number 1, because the risk here is less about a single shocking ingredient and more about the power of familiarity. Some Heinz tomato soups still sit in the medium salt territory on pack labeling. In other words, they can be fine, but only if you are genuinely treating the tin as a portioned meal rather than an effortless, just finish it comfort fix. When a product is this familiar, portion awareness is exactly what slips first. You do not measure nostalgia. You just eat it. But that's only half the story. The deeper issue is what happens when a national comfort brand flirts with health language. Back on 23 April 2003, the Advertising Standards Authority recorded an issue involving H.J. Heinz Co. connected to overclaiming 5A Day in relation to soup. The point is not to paint Heinz as a villain. The point is to remind you how easily marketing can stretch a wholesome idea until it starts to outrun what most shoppers would reasonably infer from a tin on a shelf. What makes this worse is the scale of influence. When a small brand gets a little too enthusiastic with health messaging, it is an isolated eye roll. When a household name does it, the ripple is cultural. It shapes what families teach themselves to believe about vegetable foods in a hurry. It encourages the idea that a comforting tin can quietly double up as a health decision, when the reality is usually more ordinary and more conditional. This is the emotional peak of the countdown for a reason. The uncomfortable feeling is not just maybe this is salty. It is maybe I trusted this for so long that I stopped thinking altogether. And that is the real lesson I take from Heinz. Comfort is not a crime, but comfort is not the same thing as health. So I am not telling you to banish Heinz from your cupboard. I am saying treat it like what it truly is. A reliable comfort food that deserves a quick label check and a little portion honesty. And if you want to keep the warmth without the doubt, you will need a couple of smarter, lower drama picks to balance the story. 1 M&S. When I talk about safer canned soup picks, I'm not looking for a miracle tin. I'm looking for something calm, measurable, and honest enough that you can trust it on a normal Tuesday. That is why M&S is a surprisingly useful brand to mention here. It doesn't need to shout. It just needs to show you the numbers. Take M&S cream of tomato soup 400 g. The label lists salt at 0.45 g per 100 g. That matters because the UK Salt Reduction Program sets an average target of 0.50 g per 100 g for soups, with a maximum of 0.59 g per 100 g. So this is one of those rare moments where the maths does not fight the brand story. When you read that figure out loud, it feels like a grounded choice, rather than a gamble disguised as comfort. The sugar number also lands in a place that makes sense for tomato soup. At 5.9 g of sugars per 100 g, it reads like the natural sweetness of tomatoes plus a small balancing hand, not a stealthy dessert wearing a red label. That distinction matters for shoppers who are trying to eat sensibly without turning every lunch break into an interrogation. What I like most is how the ingredients support the same quiet honesty. Tomato puree sits at 72%, followed by a short list of familiar stabilizers and fats, including corn flour and rice flour. Yes, it is still a manufactured product, but it is easier to tell yourself with a straight face that this is a proper tomato soup rather than a budget-thickened illusion. The story holds together. And crucially, this is not a brand you need to defend with health halo slogans. You don't have to pretend it is a detox or a 5-a-day shortcut. The point is simpler. If you want a tin that behaves closer to the national targets and doesn't surprise you with sugar spikes, M&S gives you a decent starting lane. Even the everyday shopper mood seems to reflect that. On a major retailer listing, M&S cream of tomato soup sits around 4.1 out of 5 from a substantial number of reviews. That is not proof of perfection, but it is a nice reality check that people who actually buy lunch for a living week tend to be satisfied. So no, M&S is not a magic shield. But if you want a safe pick one that you can justify with numbers, ingredients, and real-world confidence, this is one of the calmer names to put on your list. 2. Aldi. If M&S is the calm, numbers first, comfort pick, Aldi Bramwell's is the one that surprises you from the other direction. It is the value brand you reach for when you want a warm lunch without the psychological guilt of spending too much on a tin. And in a cost-of-living era, that is not a small role. The key question is whether value automatically means risk. With Aldi, the answer is not necessarily. The most useful thing about Aldi at a brand level is its reformulation mindset. The retailer states that 83% of its products are already compliant with the Public Health England 2024 targets, and that it has updated its salt reduction policy to align with those targets for applicable own brand lines. That gives you a fair and grounded storytelling angle. You can buy cheap without buying reckless. And for soups specifically, the 2024 program sets an average salt target of 0.50 gr per 100 gram and a maximum of 0.59 gras per 100 gras. So if you are hunting for lower drama tins, Aldi sits in a sensible, starting lane. But here is the honest caveat that actually increases trust in your script. Aldi's own product pages for Bramwell soups often emphasize that online details are provided for convenience and that shoppers should always read the label because ingredients and products can change. In other words, the safe way to recommend Bramwell's is not to promise a perfect number for every tin. It is to encourage a quick label check on the specific tomato, vegetable, or minestrone you are holding. That label habit matters for sugar and texture too. Bramwell's is a value line, so the expectation is a straightforward recipe built for everyday eating. When you find a tin with a shorter ingredient list and a sugar level that feels like tomatoes plus balance, not a sneaky sweet drink in soup clothing, that is where the brand does its best work. And this is the part that keeps the tone human. Even among food writers and shoppers, Bramwell's tomato soup is often framed as a surprisingly decent-tasting alternative for the price, with thickness and tang that can feel close to far pricier names, even if it is not flawless. That kind of real-world sentiment gives you permission to say something simple and fair. Few tins in this aisle are perfect, but some are quietly good enough to trust for everyday life. So Bramwell's earns its place as safe pick too, because it is value with a safety mindset, provided you do the one responsible thing the brand itself nudges you to do. Read the label, then enjoy the bargain without the anxiety. The big message here isn't that canned soup is bad, it's that words like traditional, vegetable, or premium can't replace the boring but vital habit of reading the nutrition label and keeping an eye on official food alerts. With the UK salt targets for soup in mind and the NHS guidance of no more than 6 g of salt a day, one tin can be the difference between a sensible lunch and a day that quietly tips into too much. The safest shoppers aren't the ones who buy the most expensive brand. They're the ones who buy with their eyes open. If you love tinned soup, you don't have to give it up. Just treat it like comfort food with conditions. Check the salt per 100 green. Think about portion size and choose the calmer options when you can. Now I'm curious, which brand on this list shocked you the most and what UK food category should we investigate next?